One of my favourite companies in the world.
Sure, most of you can guess exactly what is going on. 300 horsepower. These are proper meaty boys. I've actually left my big hammer at home. These are brick. Oh, you. Just noticed this anti-tramp bar bolt's loose. Racing. Not really sure which way to go about this. Yeah, these are rubbish. Drill a hole in Esther's floor. No going back now. That is not how you're supposed to do it. Doesn't make sense to me. I think I'm just going to attack this with a hacksaw.
Hello and welcome to this video. I'm Marcus Hayes and today I'm going to be fitting some really cool parts to my favourite car, Esther, the ST170 powered Mk1 Escort, that have been supplied by one of my favourite companies in the world. Loads of you have been asking lately if I'm going to be getting any of the printed t-shirts back in stock. Well, you're in luck, because I recently took delivery of another batch of those t-shirts. So we've got the ones featuring Maud, my Mk1 Mk2 Escort. These ones featuring an image of my dad's Mk3 Escort. And then the navy ones that feature an image of Esther. All these are super high quality garments as usual. Got custom neck labels, professionally created artwork. And yeah, by the time this video goes live, those t-shirts will be bagged and tagged and up on my website at marcushayesuk.com. But they will probably sell out fast, as usual. Now, with all that being said, I'm going to jump in Roger, my beautiful girlfriend Kat's plastic Ford Fiesta, and head over to Esther's garage. And I'm going to make a decent head start on today's jobs, and then I'll turn the camera back on. So I'll see you in a sec. Hello, right, so a couple of hours have passed and I've already made a good head start on fitting what is, in my opinion, the best modification you can do to a rear-wheel drive Escort, or any rear-wheel drive car really. And I'm sure most of you can guess exactly what is going on. I've stripped apart the rear axle and I've got Esther's diff removed. And yep, she's going to be getting her very own LSD today. And some uprated shafts. Now, Esther's LSD and shafts were supplied by Retro Ford, which are genuinely one of my favourite companies. They've been key to both of my Zetec conversions, and they supply parts to convert your classic Ford to run a Duratec engine, but they do so much more. They've lately been developing parts to put a Duratec into a Mk1 Cortina, and I've seen that they've now released brand new standard type cross members for Mk1 and Mk2 Escort. So yeah, they're always bringing out new parts. If we look into Esther's engine bay, she has Retro Ford engine mounts. She's also got the Retro Ford silicone hose kit, and she's got the Retro Ford motorsport spec alternator kit. And Maud, my Mk1 Mk2 Escort, is running the Retro Ford engine mounts and the other style of Retro Ford alternator kit. Oh, Esther's also got a Retro Ford starter motor, and the only reason that Maud hasn't got a Retro Ford starter motor is because she's running a flywheel that needs a Pinto starter motor, whereas this has got a light flywheel, which is Zetec spec in terms of the ring gear. Now, we'll leave links in the description to Retro Ford's social media and their YouTube channel. If you could all do me a favour and go and give them a follow on social media and subscribe to their YouTube channel, I'd really appreciate it. They've always been really supportive about what I'm doing on YouTube, and as I say, they genuinely are one of my favourite companies. Now, let's have a look at Esther's new LSD and her new uprated half shafts. So what I've got in this bag is my spare diff that has already been fitted with the Blackline LSD that I got from Retro Ford. And when I bought the kit from Retro Ford, which included the Blackline LSD and these uprated half shafts, which we'll have a closer look at in a minute, I opted for their full kit, which included a full set of bearings for the diff. Also comes with a diff gasket, which I've actually already got hanging on the axle, and it comes with the crush washer, and I opted for a genuine Ford pinion seal. So yeah, I bought the complete kit, and then I sent the kit and the LSD and my spare diff
to my diff man, which is Southern Axles in Watford. I will leave their details in the description. And yeah, the diff has been fully rebuilt and the Blackline LSD has been installed, along with all the new bearings and the crush washer, and as I say, the genuine Ford pinion seal. Now I will briefly talk about diff ratios, because you may remember I was actually asking on my social media if anyone had a 4.1 to 1 diff that I could buy so that I could install this LSD into. And a 4.1 to 1 diff is what I've got in Maud, my Maud Mk1 Escort, but she's running a Type 9 gearbox, whereas Esther is running a 6-speed Mazda RX-8 gearbox, which has an even more ridiculously short first gear than a stock Type 9, although it's worth noting that Maud has a longer first gear in her Type 9. Anyway, my thoughts were that if I got a 4.1 to 1 diff, I could just pull away in second gear on the RX-8 gearbox, and then I would basically still have a 5-speed gearbox. But I had a look at a gear ratio calculator online, and it turned out that if I was to use a 3.54 ratio diff, which is what I have gone with, and this was one that I already had in my garage, that would actually be closer to the ratios that I've got in Maud with the 4.1 diff and the Type 9 with the longer first gear than it would have been if I used a 4.1 diff in Esther and pulled away in second. So yeah, I was going to experiment with a 4.1 to 1 diff, but I'm really glad that I looked at that gear ratio calculator online, because it turns out that the 3.54 is the better option, and as I say, I already had it in my garage. And the fact that I'm going to be using all 6 gears on the Mazda 6-speed is going to mean that potentially the car will have quite a high top speed as well as really good acceleration. Anyway, let's move on to the half shafts. Now I think these are 3J half shafts. I might be wrong, but yeah, these are seriously heavy duty, much more heavy duty than original ones, and also more heavy duty than the ones that are fitted to Maud. These ones have actually got the 18 tooth spline, and I actually would have gone for these half shafts in Maud, but I'd already had her diff rebuilt, and yeah, I would have had to change a couple of bits in the diff. So because I'd already had the diff rebuilt, I decided to go with uprated 22 spline shafts, which are still strong enough for her. But with these shafts and this diff, it's going to mean that Esther's rear axle is going to be capable of handling 300 horsepower, which is way more power than she's ever going to have. Now, these half shafts came already assembled, which was really handy. This plate here is what you need if you're running disc brakes on the back, which I'm not, so I can take that off. Yeah, they come assembled with the bearing already on. I've put some brand new studs into the hub here, and they are what I picked up from Speed Shack in the last video, along with 8 brand new nuts for Revolution alloys, and Steve also had a spare window winder in stock, so I'll be able to replace the broken one on the driver's side of Esther later on today. I will leave links in the description to Speed Shack's social media. Definitely get in touch with them if you need any bits, especially if you're after any wheel nuts or studs. Now, with all that being said, I think it's about time we chuck these new parts into Esther's rear axle. And this is something that I've shown loads of times on the channel. So I'm going to cue the music and get this done as quick as I can. Let's just have a compare of the old half shafts and the new one. The size difference in the splines. Yeah, these are proper meaty boys. Definitely should have used a torque wrench, but I didn't. I've actually left my big hammer at home, so I need a brick. Oh, you. We've still got a little bit sticking out, luckily, and there's loads sticking out the back. So I should be able to get this out. We are in business. Yes. Now, where were we? Yeah, all these bolts look pretty mullered down the end there, where I've been over tightening them every time. But I did find a set of genuine Ford zinc plated bonnet bolts, and I've tried one of them and it threads in. Got enough bolts for this side. I just had a look at the half shaft bolts on the other side and they don't look as bad, so I just won't do them up as tight. Just noticed this anti-tramp bar bolt's loose. Dear oh dear. All that's left to do now in terms of the diff job is to put oil in the axle. And we'll just fill her up with this Castrol B373 racing gear oil for a limited slip. I think it takes just over a litre. I've got 2 bottles, so. Sweet. All right, so I'm not going to put the wheels back on yet, but I have put a wheel nut on each side just to hold the brake drum on, because I want to start it up while it's in gear and just check that everything's spinning all right. In a second. Let that run for a minute or two, let the diff prime with oil, and then we'll crack on with the next job. Alright, so I've moved the axle stands to the chassis, and I've got the axle supported by the jack, and I want to have a look at something that loads of you have commented on, and it is that wonky bump stop. It also means I'll have a chance to check how these lowering blocks and that are stacked, because I've done that years ago. I might actually take out possibly the rubber bits, although they are pulley bush, the saddles I think they're called. I might even take out this bit, and if I was to do away with those saddle bushes, it would raise the suspension ever so slightly, which may help me get the fitment I want when I fit the other wheels with their spacers and their other size tyres, which is one of the things I want to be doing very soon. I just need to polish the lips up on those other wheels. Also, another thing I can do is, if I leave the U-bolt nuts loose-ish and then lower the car down, I can try and make sure that the axle is central, because one tyre is definitely closer to the arch than the other one. That might be to do with the rear quarter panels being slightly different, or it might be to do with the axle not being central. But yeah, I always wanted to sort out that bump stop. I always wanted to have a look at how the lowering blocks are stacked, and try and centralise the axle, but I wanted to wait until I was working on the axle like I have been today, fitting the new LSD and half shafts. So yeah, first job, gonna loosen all these nuts on the U-bolts. I haven't got to take them off completely, and yeah, the same the other side. Let's pump the axle up. Nice lift in the car. It might be the shock absorber holding it up. Let's see how these are stacked. So I've got that. Alright, so the way they were is in this order. That's not really able to locate into this bit, because that saddle doesn't really poke through enough. Not really sure which way to go about this. Alright, so I've actually put it back how it was, but I will be revisiting this at some point. What I can see is that this bottom saddle does lock into here, so that's that located, and then the bolt that goes through the bottom of the leaf spring kind of locates into that, so that's the leaf spring kind of located with the base plate essentially. The lowering block, the hole in that is bigger than the bolt, so that is, you know, able to move forwards and backwards. So that's not really properly locating, but because the top of it does locate into this saddle, and then this saddle does locate into this plate, I can sort of visually see that this saddle is lined up with this one to make sure that that's central. And I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to show you on the camera, but I can visually see through there to make sure that this saddle is central with this bit, even though it doesn't really poke through enough to lock into there. So even though I'm not sure this is right, it seems like it's going to locate better if I keep it how it was, rather than trying to remove any of these pieces. So yeah, it's going to stay how it is, but I am going to be replacing the bump stops for these original type ones, which I've had for ages. I gave them a quick spray can paint job recently, and yeah, I'm going to bung them on. Here you can see that these just don't have the rigidity that the original ones do. This is all metal on the original ones, whereas this whole thing is poly. And they do have these pathetic little strips that go there to try and strengthen it, but it's just no good. Yeah, these are rubbish. Shame really, because they match my diff Polybush bump stop. I feel like I'll have to paint that Diff one black now because there's nothing else orange under here. I don't need to mess about with all these lowering blocks because I've decided to leave them as they are. That's all loose. So's the other side, and we'll tighten that up when she's back on the ground. Right, next job. Now, I've mentioned loads of times on the channel the hassle I've had with this exhaust, and I do feel that it needs another bracket on this side of the back box, maybe, you know, going up to the boot floor. But there is a mounting point on this exhaust system that I'm not utilising yet, and someone did get in touch with me and say that if I do use that mounting point, it won't allow the exhaust to twist, so it might end up being alright without the extra bracket on the back box. So yeah, I'm gonna drill a hole in Esther's floor and utilise that other exhaust mounting point. And here it is, right next to where the tramp bar bracket is on the chassis. So yeah, it's slightly forward from that seam, so it's going to be around here. This actually came with this exhaust system. So I'm going to try and do this without taking the exhaust system off because I'm lazy. No going back now. If I can just unhook it from here, maybe that will lower it enough. That is not how you're supposed to do it. Sweet, now time will tell if that prevents the exhaust starting to hang down on one side. But ultimately, if the mounting point's there, then I probably should be using it. So now I'm going to move slightly more forward on the car because I've got another little job to do underneath. Now, I've been banging on lately about the fact that I think that Esther's RX-8 6-speed gearbox is on its way out. The symptoms I'm getting seem to be the same as you'd get if the synchro rings were worn. So it's a bit crunchy if you try and change gear quickly, and if you're sort of coming up to a turn, you know, you change down from third to second, it starts rattling while you've got your foot on the clutch still. As soon as you lift your clutch foot and, you know, the gearbox is under load, the noise goes away. Also, if you're rolling to the junction, you know, you've just changed down to second and you keep your foot on the clutch, once you get down to a certain speed, it also goes away. So yeah, I think it's the synchro rings. What I did try and do is change the gearbox oil, because I may have put the wrong stuff in when I filled it up the first time, but this time I made sure that I got the right stuff. I think it's GL4 that it needs. I can't remember the viscosity, but yeah, I changed that, and yeah, it still does it. It's not major, the gearbox works fine. It's just, as I say, you have to shift a bit slow and you get that sort of rattle noise under certain conditions. Now, when I'm looking on the internet, now this doesn't make sense to me at all, but there's people out there that have, you know, in their RX-8s, have, you know, thought they've got a rattly clutch, changed the clutch, the problem's still there, thought that the gearbox needs a rebuild, you know, rebuild the gearbox, and the noise is still there, and it turns out to be the gearbox mount. It doesn't make sense to me why your gearbox would, you know, give you those sort of symptoms when the gearbox mount is at fault, unless, you know, it's obvious and the gearbox is moving around. But one of the bolts on my gearbox mount is cross-threaded, and it has been for ages. I've just, you know, always just checked that it hasn't completely fallen out. So I think before I write off the gearbox completely, even though I don't think my issue is being caused by the gearbox mount, I think I should address that issue and then see where we're at. Now, the way I've mounted the Mazda box is I've got this Capri mount, which I slightly modified. I think it had like a raised bit here where the normal rubber gearbox mount would attach to it. So I sort of cut that off, got my mate to weld a flat plate in there, and then I've drilled it so that the studs that already hang down from this gearbox line up with that, and then you put a nut on the end. This is a really weird thread. If I remember rightly, it's M12 by 1.25 rather than M12 by 1.5, which is, you know, a normal M12 thread. And yeah, basically I've got it mounted on these lowering blocks, which you would use when you're mounting a Type 9 into an Escort or an RS2000 gearbox into an Escort. So yeah, really simple way of mounting it. I have got a piece of rubber in here just so that it's not completely solid mounted, you know, just because it'll be ridiculously noisy otherwise. But yeah, quite a primitive way to do it. So yeah, one of these bolts is cross-threaded Yeah, it's that one. It's probably the thread in the lowering block that's knackered. I think that would go before the actual bolt did. Yeah, the bolt looks fine. It's got bits of thread on it, which are bits of the thread from the lowering block. But I've got a brand new set of gearbox lowering blocks here and a brand new set of bolts. But I think I am just going to change the one side. Makes no sense changing the other one if it's fine. Yeah, those two are absolutely fine. Put the jack under it, just so we're not putting extra strain on the other side of the mount. And we can take the other bolt out from this side. Actually, because of the way this is attached, I mean, this is just nut and bolted through the floor. I'm going to have to loosen the other side and then let the jack down a little bit just to lower the gearbox slightly so that I'm able to get this out. That's all it's given me. And it's worth noting that I should really have a spreader plate here, but where the holes are for the gearbox mount is right where the gearbox tunnel overlaps the floor, so you know it's double skin there anyway, and I've used these massive washers. Here we go. Alright, in with the new lowering block. It would have been so much easier if I just dropped the whole mount. Anyway, like I say, I don't think that's going to solve my issue, but got to try it, seeing as so many people with the Mazda RX-8s seem to get rid of their rattly gearboxes by changing their gearbox mount, and mine was definitely not ideally secured because that one bolt was cross-threaded. Anyway, I've got one more job I want to do today. Alright, I think it's about time I mounted this fuse box on the side of this switch panel, exactly how it was on the alloy one. In the last video I mentioned that it seemed like we was having a bit of a loose connection from this plug that plugs into this fuse box, but what I've done is I've closed up these female bullet connectors, whatever you'd call them, and I've done the same in these three as well. They were pretty loose, and yeah, there seems to be no loose connection now, so it was just a loose connection between the multi-plug and the fuse box, whereas I thought it might have been something to do with whatever dodgy wiring is behind that tape. So yeah, I'm just going to mount this to the side how it was before. I need to cut a little bit out of here. I don't have to do it super neat because the fuse box itself will cover it, but I do need to make sure I cut enough out, because something I found out recently, thanks to my friend Porrig Murphy in Northern Ireland, shout out to you if you're watching, mate, is that carbon fibre actually conducts electricity. So you definitely don't want any of these contacts. I mean, most of them are covered by the multi-plugs that plug into them, but yeah, you don't want any of the metal bits of this fuse box touching the carbon fibre switch panel. Yeah, I was really shocked when he told me about it, but I've done a test and yeah, it does conduct electricity. I don't have any masking tape, annoyingly, so I'm just going to have to mark it with this electrical tape. I think I'm just going to attack this with a hacksaw. Alright, now I think it's about time we start getting Esther back in a drivable state. I'm going to throw the rear wheels back on and then lower her down. And then I need to tighten the nuts on the bottom of the U-bolts. And while I'm doing all that, I'm going to try and do it in such a way that the axle is as central as I can get it. Yeah, good thing about these half shafts, you've got this shoulder so that the wheel can lean on. Same as what an RS half shaft has got, but my half shafts weren't RS ones. Just measured roughly, just with my fingers, between the tyre and the inner arch, or the inner tub, and this side is definitely tighter there and looser here, so in theory the axle does need to move this way. I suppose it's going to be better if I jack it up and put the axle stands under the chassis again so that the axle's free to move, because at the moment the weight of the car is on the axle because the jack is under the axle. Yeah, I'll rearrange that and then see you underneath the car. Alright, so Also need to make sure these bump stops are in the right place. 3.5 fingers there. Almost 4 fingers there. Wedge it up in there. So yeah, I've got my rubber hammer wedged in between the tyre and the chassis. There is now more room than there was. It's about the same. Let's get the car on the ground, tighten all the nuts up. I need to have a quick wash and take this car for a test drive to test the LSD out.
Gearbox is way more usable with the 354 diff. Awesome. And now I can utilise all 6 gears. Obviously before, first gear used to give you a real, you know, shove in the back, but it was all over, like, in milliseconds, you know. Whereas now it feels way more usable. Still accelerates really well, because first gear is ridiculously short. Way shorter than a Type 9 first gear. You've now got the benefits of the acceleration of the ridiculously short first gear, which is made better by having the longer gear in the diff, and you get to benefit having 6 gears. I think when I looked at the gear ratio calculator, top speed will be ridiculous. I mean, it's only like 130, 140 mile an hour, but you know, I don't want to be going that fast in a car I built myself. So yeah, it's cool to have that 6th gear to cruise on the motorway without having a really sluggish acceleration like you would have if you had a 3.5 in an Escort with a Type 9. Yeah, I'm loving this new diff ratio. Oh, I can tell you that the wheels definitely seem more even now, the gap between the tyre and the arch, which is good. So it just shows it was all down to the alignment of the axle. Yeah, so things do seem to be coming together for this car. Still loads to do. I'm pretty sure the gearbox is still no good. So yeah, if any of you out there have got an RX-8 6-speed gearbox that you know runs sweet, and you're anywhere near just outside West London or just outside North London, do get in touch, because I'm definitely up for buying one. Even better if you're breaking an RX-8 and you know the car's still drivable, so we can, you know, take the car for a drive to see how the gearbox is running. That'd be even better. See if I can get the noise to happen on the gearbox. There it is. If I lift my clutch, it goes away. Very strange. See, I don't think it's the release bearing, because normally the noise would go away when you press the clutch, whereas this noise only happens when you press the clutch. But yeah, other than that, it just crunches if you change gear really fast, which I'm just not doing. Until I've got another gearbox, I don't want to completely destroy this one. Alright, so into the comfortable and quiet cockpit of Roger the Plastic Fiesta. After quite a productive day around the garage, I think I'm definitely going to stay indoors tomorrow and catch up with some editing, but I'll be back around the garage probably the day after that to fit some more really cool parts to the car. Really happy that Esther now has an LSD and uprated half shafts. I want to send a massive thanks out to Retro Ford for supplying those bits. They actually very kindly gave me a small discount on those parts. So if you could all do me a favour and help me thank them by subscribing to their YouTube channel, which is really interesting anyway, and following them on social media. I will leave links to all of that in the description, along with a link to their website, where you can go and check out the vast array of cool parts that they're able to supply. Also, massive thanks to Steve at Speed Shack and Southern Axle Services for your parts in what I've been up to today. Now, I think this video is probably already a bit too long, so I'm going to stop waffling now and end it here. But if you did think it was any good, please do give it a thumbs up and a share. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down.
Click subscribe to keep up to date with all my future uploads, and check the links in the description to my social media. I'll also leave a link to my website down there for any of you guys that want to check out my regular blog posts or get your hands on some official Marcus Hayes merchandise. And don't forget, I've now restocked on the printed t-shirts, which I know loads of you were waiting for me to do. So yeah, go and grab those before they run out if you fancy one. I'll also leave a link to my Patreon in the description. Massive thanks to all my patrons. I really appreciate your support. And as always, I'll leave my email address in the description for anyone who wants to contact me. But other than that, until next time, thanks for watching.